Good evening, everybody. Evening, everybody. I have muted you because I've got Alan and Craig off mute, but I am encouraging you to look at the chat down the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to actually raise questions for me so I can also have a chat with you. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. We'll just give a couple more minutes. It's fantastic. I'm really appreciating the versatility that Zoom or Skype or Microsoft Teams can provide us nowadays in terms of actually being literally in everybody's home at the press of a button. And tonight we're here to talk about cladding, which is actually a big passion of mine. Bizarre, right? Because I don't look like a chick that actually would dig cladding, but I do dig cladding. And I even dig actually banning cladding. That is going to become like my mantra on my t-shirt very soon. Well, combustible cladding anyway. So I'm very pleased that that you've all joined us tonight, and we've got a lot of opportunities to talk about what's going on, and if you're affected, what we can, basically provide you advice-wise in terms of how you proceed. But certainly, I think it's a hot topic, and it's good to see that we've got so many people actually joining us. So we've got 32 in the room, so I'm going to get started by actually starting the session, and we'll just let the others come in as they come in. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Samantha Reece. I'm the Director of the Australian Department about Advocacy. The odd thing is I do this voluntarily, right? But I'm a passionate person about housing choice, and I actually started in 2016 in WA, and we did research last year with 3,300 people nationally, and that's when we became a national organisation, and we're going to repeat that research next January, which I'm very excited about as well. So we actually have got tonight Craig Hopcraft. Craig, could you please raise your hand and wave for me?
Okay,
there we go. There's Craig. Okay. And also Alan Ferre. Alan's also from CHU, who is actually a sponsor of ours. I will declare that up front. But I'm very pleased that Alan's joining us because he's manager for Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia. And he also sat on as a board member of the Strata Community Association for Victoria for 3 years. So I think he brings a strata hat and an insurance hat. And we all know, because when I attended this conference in Brisbane in February and met Craig Hopcraft, and I heard what was going on, I was slightly alarmed because, it had been kind of like kept quite secret, I think, in terms of then hush hush. But it was quite clear that with 4,500, which I was told then, but Craig's going to give me all the latest facts and figures, 4,500 buildings identified and a kitty of 600 million, this screamed out to me that there was kind of like something not right, and certainly that has prompted me to take proactive action. And I know Queensland's banning combustible cladding. I have spoken to Minister Wynn's office, and there certainly has been an indication from Victoria government to take a similar route, and I'm going to be lobbying very hard in WA, because if we can actually get ahead of this, then we certainly won't have to situation which we're seeing in Victoria, which is also very sad. So we've got Craig Hopcraft, we've got Alan, and what we're going to basically do is talk through a variety of different situations so that we actually can make sure that we're helping you. Like I said, there's a chat button down the bottom. 3 have already started. Yes, I am recording this session, so I will send the link for this session out to all of you tomorrow. Okay, so if you have to hop off or whatever, don't fret. You will get a copy of the recording. And yes, it will be on the Australian Department of Advocacy YouTube. So thank you guys for making sure that I'm on my ball. All right, so I guess I want to talk about cladding and combustible cladding. And Craig, you've been in the building industry for 40 years. So why have you decided that you actually thought it was time to actually get into combustible cladding?
Well, look, after hearing and witnessing firsthand the problems with cladding in general, or non-compliant cladding at least, and the complexity of the the issue at the moment. It's just something I was drawn to. And I also understand the frustration in the community that this was ever allowed to happen. And also the frustration on the perception of how long it's taking to get going. But the good news is it is finally starting to gather steam. And I think over the next few months, we'll see quite a few buildings start. COVID certainly hasn't helped. But I think over the next few months, we'll see things start moving.
Well, I guess for me, like that conference, for me, every year I try and kind of like find something that I can champion. And when I went to that conference and I heard about some buildings, and this was in Sydney, were like eskies, like just virtually 20-story eskies.
Yes.
And you were talking to me about a situation where 5 litres of fuel or petrol equivalent to what per 1 square metre. Like, I don't know that, and I know that the Victorian government hasn't released the building names that have been identified, and I'm kind of like glad of that because of real concerns for arsony. But like, how are people reacting to actually living in that situation, Craig?
Well, to give you an example, I actually had an elderly gentleman on Friday contact me regarding this talk tonight, and he's living in a 3 or 4 story EPS building, which is basically solid foam, 75 mil thick solid foam. And I think one of the main things that people don't quite understand that aren't living in any of these buildings is the mental anguish and the stress that just living in a building that is highly flammable causes. He was probably 75, 80 years old, and he's got grandkids, and he worries about his grandkids coming over. And he actually mentioned to me that he said, look, with all the COVID stuff and everyone's talking about mental health, but no one's talking about mental health for these people. And there's a lot of frustration at the moment out there with a lot of these occupiers. So yes, it really does bring home how dangerous it is and how much stress it's causing to a lot of the community.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, from a consumer protection situation, I guess that is a concern for me. Alan, are you seeing that playing out at all? Because obviously I know that on my apartment building, we had a small feature which was actually deemed as being non-compliant. Our insurance rate went up $10,000. We actually spent $10,000 on replacing that artwork. So it was non-combustible, and we saved ourselves $10,000 per annum. Are you seeing this kind of thing play out?
Yeah, we are. And one of the things from insurance is that we're not the regulators of what's compliant within the building code. When we set our price, we set it around risk. And for combustible cladding, you've made reference to the petrol, which I think is a good visual one. It's really easy to explain. What we experience and are concerned about is the frequency of damage and severity. And where there's cladding on buildings, there is definitely an increased severity. So there's predominantly fire damage claims. If they catch fire, they burn very, very, very quickly. Yeah, we've seen 2 of those of the real big note ones down in Victoria, Lacrosse being the first one and Neo being the second one. And that's our concern. They're both multi-million-dollar claims that insurance companies are paying out on. The secondary systems did a good job on loss of life, but there's extensive property damage. But where the industry has actually been able to support owners' corporations is that insurance is still available. Yes, there is increased premium being applied and there's increased excesses being applied, but the owners are still able to protect their assets. But some of those premiums are maybe 50, 60, 70, 80, up to 100% more than they otherwise would have done, depending on the percentage of cladding on a building and the type of cladding.
So, at the conference, and Craig will tell you that he can attest to this, when I said, why are we still having combustible cladding when we're having these kinds of issues? And they said, well, it took us 20 years to get asbestos out of the building system. And I said, well, if you think I'm going to wait 20 years, then you've got another thing coming, because that's not going to be the case at all. But why have we suddenly reached ahead? Was it the Grenfell Towers? Was it the Weir report last year? What do you think? What it was that created this certain situation to actually address what's going on?
But for me, and from how we've assessed it from insurance, it absolutely was the Grenfell situation. There'd been a number of fires previously, La Crosse being one, and other parts of the world where cladding had seen extensive damage, and the visual was the same. Using La Crosse as an example, let's say that's a $20 million claim, which is big from insurance companies, but there was no loss of life. So so the secondary systems, the AMFD did a great job to protect that. But then Grenfell came in and there was extensive loss of life. And that scenario, whilst may not be exactly replicable of what goes on in Australia, it certainly increased the political lens of saying this could happen in my backyard, this is not acceptable, this isn't what we want to be seeing any of our residents suffer to. So that really focused on something that probably always should have been there post La Crosse and shouldn't have happened in the first place. So it was that very significant loss of life that it was able to get this into the political spotlight, which then got our state and federal governments interested in really trying to find some solutions.
Craig?
Yeah, look, it's unfortunate it did take for something like Grenfell and then at La Crosse. And some of these things, unfortunately, I know it sounds ridiculous, but they're not a problem until they become a real problem. And this is almost like asbestos 2.0. Yeah. And it did take them, several years to even, start removing asbestos and all the rest. But, I think the community's got to understand too that this is a new industry, if you like, and it's been started from scratch from CSV, and everyone's finding their way a bit, but it has started to find its legs, and we can see in the industry itself things are starting to pick up.
Yeah,
well, that's encouraging because some people have been waiting. How long do you think?
At least, 2 years, 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, and also what we're seeing with the work that CSV are doing is actually unmasking some of the other defect issues that are inherent in new builds that have gone on in the last 10 years. And that's one of the extra complexities that CSV are finding is they're taking off the cladding. And then what sits behind it has also got some defect issues, which is sort of out of scope for their world a little bit.
Water membrane. That's all I can say to you. Like, I'm going to also lobby for water membrane installers to be licensed, which Queensland are also doing. You know what I mean? That's where we also need to really make sure we are doing our homework.
Yeah, and Sam, that's right. I think that's a really good point. I moved down to Victoria 10 years ago. When I moved down to Victoria, there was absolute ununderstandable outcry about leaky balconies.
Yeah.
And without being flippant about it in any way, shape or form, I'm not, because of this. Leaky balconies is unlikely to lead to big loss of life, but it's going to lead to big financial implications for people living in those units. Cladding is just another example of incredibly poor practices and governance within the building framework that owners' corporations are being left in isolation to try and sort out for themselves. But in this instance, unlike balconies, the government are actually, certainly the Victorian government, are actually stepping in to do something. People are going to have emotive views as whether that's too much, whether that's not enough, and I understand that. But they are stepping in, putting $600 million of taxpayers' money to try and rectify what they can. And they're also, for the first time, having genuine discussions about remedial work that needs to go in the building code of Australia, which is not a simple task.
Well, no. So, David Chandler, New South Wales Building Commissioner, he's obviously been championing that cause, and he's actually going to be joining me at the end of this month to have a chat about what's happening over in New South Wales and how he's basically trying to get the industry into shape. And I think, I think that, listen, we do research with apartment livers. Like I said, we did research with 3,300 people last year, 86% satisfaction. Like, people actually do like apartment living, and we call it the easy breezy lifestyle. It's just the fact that sometimes in this situation, that you have been caught out, and it is, as Craig said, asbestos 2.0, right? So at this point, you're right, there does need to be government intervention, and I'm pleased to see that's happening also in New South Wales. And we do need to be able to be doing that in a speedy manner so that those people who are living in those environments are not suffering unduly. And I think that's definitely the case. So how do you know if you have combustible cladding? I know that seems, but is it that bright coloured stuff that you might have on your building, or what is it, and how do we know what it looks like?
Well, the problem is EPS is just as big a problem as ACP. I mean, ACP is a lot easier to pick. It is the silvery type colour and all the rest, and you generally know if you've got aluminium composite panel on your building. With EPS, which is highly 75 mil foam product, a lot of the time that's buried by render, and you can generally tell if you walk around and knock on the walls that they'll have a hollow sound to them if they are EPS. And if you even suspect that, I mean, I think the first point of call would be contacting the owners corporation of your building or the body corporate, and they'll arrange for the appropriate consultants or inspections to be done to determine whether it is actually non-compliant or not. But yes, it is, especially with the EPS, it is a bit harder to, because render can go over brickwork, go over foam, it can go over a number of different materials, and it's, from a visual, it's very hard to tell what's what. So yeah, if you even suspect that you've got EPS on your building, I'd be suggesting that you contact the owners corporation in the first.
Yeah, and we'd support that view, because since November 2017, for all new business insurance policies that CHU's underwritten, and some where we've continued to underwrite, we've asked for what's called a insurance report around cladding. And so that's just where the owners corporation can arrange to get it done. And Sam, I love the scenario you raised earlier about you spent $10,000 to save $10,000, so pretty much a break even. If you didn't spend it to fix it, you would have to pay an increase.
Every year I was going to pay 10,000. Well, we were going to pay 10,000 every year. I think it was like a 10-to-1 ratio return, darling, actually.
For perpetuity. And yeah, these insurance cladding reports, they're very competitively priced in the scheme of things. They're expert companies that go out and do them. And whilst it's not a full cladding report by a fire engineer, it allows the owners corporation to make sure they're getting the right premium. Because what we'll do is, if we get approached to underwrite a policy, and let's say it was built 2007, we at least would say, in our mind, there's a chance that's got flammable cladding on it. And if we don't know, we will load it by the maximum, assuming it's the worst it could be, unless the owners corporation can demonstrate otherwise. And the cost of the report will normally be far less than the increased premium that the owners corporation are going to pay. And at the same time, it will give them armed for some information, so at least they've got some expert who's been on site, inspected, and they've got their own records as, yes, there is flammable cladding. It may not be the full information. That's where you get a fire engineer and the support that sits in behind it. So we really are encouraging owners corporations to be proactive and find out what's on your building. We know in a perfect world, you should be able to go back to the developer or the builder and say, can I have the details, everything's on there, or go back to the council. But that's like trying to unscramble the omelette, which is almost impossible to do. And one of the things that I know government had recognised. So, we're just encouraging the owners corporations to be proactive and find out what's on their buildings, because that's the start of the process. Because too often what we're experiencing is owners corporations are potentially overpaying on insurance premiums. And the first time they were aware of cladding on their building is when they got some form of building order come through from the local council or some other Victorian government department saying, you have to fix this, or some show cause notice. So it's a very reactive approach at that point in time.
Yeah, proactive, I agree with that.
I think it's also worth pointing out, Sam,
yes,
that just because a building has drawings and all the rest doesn't necessarily mean it's been built exactly to those.
Correct. You read my mind.
Yes. Builders call it value management, and unfortunately, during the process of building, and not every builder does this, but there was a time, and especially with some of the composite panel, that it was being value managed out to a different product than what was specified. And that is hard to tell unless you start doing testing. So there is that fact as well, that it does make it that much more difficult sometimes to establish exactly what was used on the building.
Well, I think to be sure is actually the saying that I like to say right now, because if you know exactly what you've got, and you do need to supply, I cannot stress this, if you do know that you have flammable cladding on your building, you do need to let your insurance company know, because if you don't and you have a fire, what will you be, Alan? Cactus?
Unlikely. The law's not quite that. That can go one of two ways.
All right.
There are some companies out there who cladding does not fit their risk profile. So if they knew that they didn't have cladding, if the building had cladding, they just wouldn't have underwritten it. So if you get asked a question, always answer it truthfully. And if you lie and there's a fire, they can cancel a contract from exception, so as if the policy does not exist. From a CHU lens, we do provide underwrite risk with cladding, but what we can do legally, so let's say we say, have you got cladding? You turn around and say no, and we find out you did. If there's a fire, we can then apply the premium we would have done if we'd known at the time and applied the increased excess. So there's no benefit at all to the owner's corporation in not meeting their legal obligations of disclosure, and it's actually quite a quite high risk strategy if they're going to do that. In my words, to save a few dollars.
Yeah, please don't.
It's a full saving.
Please don't. I've always paid my insurance. I'm an insurance woman, because I tell you what, the moment you start paying for your insurance, there's invariably when something goes wrong. Yeah. Now, Craig, but not everybody's going to be able to have access to this money, right? What criteria does actually you have to meet to actually be able to be applying for the Victorian funds?
Look, it's got to be a high risk at the moment. I mean, that's the criteria. And above 3 stories, the building needs to be above 3 stories.
So what's high risk?
High risk is, let's say, EPS, and it's generally determined by the VBA. So the VBA are currently doing a statewide cladding audit, or I think they've just finished their audit, and they use an assessment tool to determine what level of risk it is. So generally, once they've done their assessment, then it goes to CSV, and now they'll determine whether it's eligible for funding. Now,
VBA, please, because not everybody understands all these acronyms. What does VBA stand for?
Victorian Building Authority.
Right, Victorian Building Authority. So do you need to approach the VBA if you want to have a test done on your building?
Look, I think the first point of call again is to the owner's corp.
Yeah.
Or the body corporate, and then they would contact the Victorian Building Authority to
right.
Done.
Okay.
If it hasn't been done already, the VBA have been pretty proactive in tracking these buildings down.
Yeah.
It's not to say some haven't fallen through the cracks, but the majority have now had their assessments done, and they're with CSV.
Yeah. All right.
And that's what we're experiencing. And the first time people live in their buildings know is actually to get some form of order from the local council, from the VBA, saying, in essence, it's show cause. We believe you've got a product on your building. It shouldn't be there. In essence, tell us what you're going to do about it.
But I think, have they done an audit then of all these buildings? Like, how many buildings have they audited, Craig? Do we know that number?
Look, to date, and there was a webinar a couple of weeks ago with the Master Builders and Cladding Safety Victoria. To date, and from memory, there's 220 buildings out for due diligence at the moment. They're trying to get 200 buildings a year done and completed, which is, a pretty aggressive strategy, but they are considering getting some of the original builders back that have got a good standing and all the rest. So at the moment, the last I heard was 220 buildings out of the 500 or thereabouts.
So some people could still be waiting another 18 months, 2 years.
Not for their reports, but look, I think they're trying to get the extremely high risk buildings done as a priority, and then the others will follow shortly after.
So I've got a question from Roscon. What to look for when comparing quotes from different cladding contractors? Now, this is something that really is like on my hit list, is to actually kind of like understand, because it is like trying to compare apples to apples, and this is a specialist area, right? Like, I've just appointed a building maintenance manager to my apartment building, or our council of owners have, because I don't know what a structural crack looks like, but I would like to have someone on my team who does. and then who knows what to do about it. So, you know, how do you actually make sure that you actually are getting the right quote for the job that you need done, Craig?
I think engaging the right consultants right at the start to get a apples for apples. If they're going out to tender, there needs to be a thorough scope of works, and there needs to be a lot of conversation and with the owners corporations and body corporates, because they're quite complex. Every job's different. Yeah. And just trying to manage, and especially now with COVID, everyone's at home, everyone's in their apartments. So it's extremely important to have the owners corporation and body corporates on board to get the occupiers to understand exactly what's happening. And like I said, every building is different. So in some situations, you might be doing one elevation. In other situations, it could be the whole building. It could even mean relocating some of the occupiers. And the problem with a lot of this is, you know, especially with EPS, it's known to have waterproofing issues and all the rest. And, you know, just determining, and a lot of that isn't exposed until the works start. So it is extremely important to get the scope right and to have the right builders on board that understand the complexities, and especially around just keeping the occupiers happy, and, you know, even certainly from a OH&S perspective.
Craig, I think I'm right. Didn't the Victorian government go out to tender for companies that they were prepared to, CSV, to engage to actually do rectification work on the buildings that they're paying for? Yeah,
look, you're right. They've got to be on the register, CSV, as well as the government register. So there's the residential cladding rectification register, and there's a construction supply register. So all builders need to go through that and get ticked off to even tender the CSV projects. So, you know, there's a lot of checks and balances done early days. And like I said, some of the original builders potentially will be coming back, depending on their relationship with the owners corporation, which sometimes is you know, can be a bit brittle.
Yeah, and also depending on the status of that builder, because some of them just don't exist anymore because of the unfortunate scenario of the phoenixing that we saw too much of in Victoria.
Yes, and look, I think the VBA have put their foot down regarding phoenixing. There was a lot of bigger tier 1 companies setting up specific businesses for specific jobs. And yes, the VBA have stepped in to stop all that, because they were just folding the companies, and, you know, they'd move on to the next one type of thing.
So if you don't deem as high risk, I guess then the option is a strata improvement loan, basically, because as we were hearing before, we could be talking up to a couple of $1 million, you know, in terms of their replacement costs. So strata improvement loans, that seems to be a relatively new concept to some stratas, but it's basically where you actually can borrow the money for the works to be undertaken, and then you pay it back as part of your strata fee returns. Have you seen that, Alan, in the industry happening?
Yes, yeah. So it's something that we have seen a rise of, with a couple of specialist companies now do that. And that is one way that proactive OCs are funding, either because the timescales that the government have put in place aren't quite working for them, or because they don't feel they're actually going to be eligible for any of the government support that may be there based on individual circumstances. So if I put my insurance risk hat on, I don't see it happening quickly enough. But if I put my humanistic person hat on, I totally understand why an owners corporation is going to be hesitant to take on $5 million worth of debt to sort out a schmozzle that they inherited through no fault of their own.
It is a terribly difficult predicament to be in. I fully understand that, but I also understand that, you know, if you don't address it and there is a fire, what would you be facing? Far more, you know, catastrophe, right? So this is definitely a situation where, I'm sorry to say this, but you have to kind of like pull up your big girl panties and actually make the right decision for your building. And it may really hurt, and I'm not saying it won't, especially financially. But for me, from an advocacy perspective, I just could not think of anything worse than you actually did not make that decision, and there was something that actually occurred that then you would always regret.
Yeah, and then if that's overlaid by most of the stratas, the owners' corporations will have committees, and if that committees have knowledge that there's danger in the building, do nothing about it, that actually is quite a big personal liability for them.
Yeah.
Because in the Victorian legislation, there's protection from the law if you're acting in good faith. But if you know something and choose to ignore it, it's going to be pretty hard to say that as a committee member you're acting in good faith when you knew there's a problem with the building, you just decided to bury it because you didn't like the cost of it so much.
And I think it's worth pointing out too, Sam, that even these buildings that don't comply, whether they're below 4 stories or they're not of high risk, there's a lot of pain out there as far as from a resale point of view for their property values.
Right. And
some of these properties are unsellable. As soon as it ends up in the Section 32, it's an issue, and there's a lot of choice out there for purchasers. And if there's a building there that has got cladding issues and all the rest, it's almost like, well, why would I buy into that building when I can buy next door?
Banks won't lend on buildings with cladding virtually now.
Sorry?
So it's become quite a risk factor as well, right?
Yeah.
For lending. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the banks have a problem with lending on those sorts of properties as well at the moment. So we are finding a lot of owners corps that don't, they mightn't be eligible for funding. They are doing strata loans to get the ball rolling, and even if they are eligible, and it is a massive problem, they're actually funding it first and then claiming back from CSV later.
My concern, and it's coming up a lot now through my chat here, is like, how do I know that I'm not dealing with someone who's dodgy? Like, is there a certification for someone who should be working in the cladding area in terms of then identifying what needs to be undertaken, the works, the scope, the costing? Who are the kinds of people we should be asking to help out with this? How do we know they're the right people?
Look, I think just being on the CSV register and obviously being on the residential cladding rectification register as well. All the builders that are on there have been through government checks, so that's a good place to start.
Now, should I share those slides, Craig, that you actually sent
yes,
through?
Do that.
Actually, have a look at these. I'm just trying to find it. Sorry, guys, I did have them up. I'm going to, yep. Just need to open them, that was all, sorry. All right, guys, so Craig sent these through to me earlier. So this is kind of like just some stats, so I wanted to kind of like take a moment to look at. So there's been 2,864 buildings inspected, 1,566 found to have combustible cladding, and of these, more than 550 are in the scope, including 3 or 4 story buildings to high rises in terms of them being high risk. Is that correct, Craig?
Yes, well, that's the latest figures from 13th of July. So it might be slightly more or less from them.
Yeah. And the current process to rectification. So statewide cladding audit refers building to Cladding Safety Victoria. Due diligence determines if cladding needs to be removed. If a performance solution is feasible, should all cladding be removed plus estimated cost? What does performance solution mean, please?
Generally, a performance solution is looked at if there is a better way of getting the building compliant, but not necessarily removing all the non-compliant cladding. And this could be done with, potentially sprinklers or dumpers externally. So it's really just coming up with a alternative solution to getting the building compliant. And it's probably, I think from memory, there was 25% that had a performance solution that has, helped sort the problem.
And that's been an interesting development for me to observe, because I remember the messaging that was the political messaging when cladding first became an issue in Victoria. If it's on there, it's all got to come off. And now we've gone to a building solution, which is some of it can stay on as long as you've got an accredited fire engineer to say it fits within all the appropriate guidelines. I think that will definitely make the pot of money stretch a bit further that the government put aside, because each building's likely to be slightly less expensive, and so they can do more of them. But one thing to bear in mind on those ones is that just because something meets the accreditation of the fire engineer, if there's cladding on the building, the insurance company is still likely to put a loading on it. So we often get asked, oh, if we get this through Cladding Safety Victoria, will our excess premiums go away? So our answer is depends. Tell us what's on the building once it's finished, and then we'll tell you what the answer is. So I can understand why the government have done this, because buildings, but sadly, most of what goes into buildings is flammable. And it is, in my view, it is appropriate to manage the risk in a different way. And there is a balance there between maximising the amount of money to spend against some good fire safety solutions that doesn't always involve taking everything off.
Yeah. If you can do that and the least kind of like disruption to the building, it must be the better option, right?
Yes, it is. There is the thought on while there's still cladding there, it could potentially still affect property values, but if they're signed off, it should take a lot of the worry out of it.
Anything you want to add with this slide, Craig?
Yeah, look, at the moment they're trying to fast track by getting the original builders back, and I think they basically, I think they've cut the times down dramatically by getting the original builders back if they can. Good. There is, obviously the whole issue of, the builder's got to be of good standing, and he's got to have to want to go back to fix the non-compliant cladding, even though a lot of these builders are probably of the opinion they certainly weren't the cause of the problem. It was an industry-wide problem as far as, building surveyors, fire engineers, and a lot of other consultants were involved in choosing what products went up. So yes, it still remains to be seen how many builders will go back, because a lot of them have got other defects and waterproofing issues and all the rest to address as well.
Listen, I think the whole topic around quality is like my number one mantra, because I think if you actually build a good quality building, you won't actually have these issues, and you don't tend to find that atypically in the more premium end of the market. But it's certainly not good to see it also happening, across all spectrums, because at the end of the day, we want people to feel safe in their home, and we want to make sure that we actually rectify this situation as quickly as we can. All right, so I've got a couple of more questions, I think. No, so certainly if you have any more questions, guys, this is from Juliet Landers. Facade engineers and consultants can assist drivers with the cladding investigations, taking samples of the cladding and getting them tested at accredited labs, developing the scope of works, the rectification, assist with tendering the works, writing a technical installation specification to which the cladding contractor will be bound, and then going on to site to supervise the works at key points. Thank you, Juliet. That's very succinct. Alan, is there a magic number percentage-wise when you talk about acceptable risk that's not detrimental to the OC's premium? Oh, that's a $64,000 question.
Yeah, zero, sadly. I'm not being flippant with my response. How we would look at it from a pricing perspective is that we ask for what is the percentage of the facade, and the facade is all the outside of the building, including the roof. So everything you see on the external face, what percentage is cladding and what type. And what we'll do is, right, between say 0 to 10, we'll put a loading on. 10 to 20 will put a bit more of a loading on, 20 to 30 a bit more of a loading, 40 to 50 a bit more of a loading. And then depending on what the type of cladding it is it A2, is it PE, which is different flammabilities, will adjust the loading as well. So I think as a general rule of thumb, if there's cladding, if there's flammable cladding on a building, expect to pay some more on your premium. How much more will depend on the total percentage and the type of cladding.
Could I ask, Alan, what have you found generally premiums are going up on, let's say, an ACP building? Is it all to a different scale, or?
Yes. So I'll just talk about the loadings for that insurance companies will put on for cladding, because the market's going up at the moment anyway. But for cladding, let's say the price would have been $10,000. It might go up to 15, or it might go up to 20. So it can have 50 to 100% depending on the severity in terms of percentage of cladding and the type of cladding. So yeah, it can be a very material amount. And some of these buildings are very large, so those loadings are $100,000 to $150,000.
Yeah, I heard of one client that he was telling me his premium went up 1,000%. Would that sound right?
Look, for cladding, I suppose I'll say that's possible, but there may be some other factors in there as well. But what it's also doing, it's not just affecting the price, because it's affecting the insurer's risk appetite. Some insurers won't do it, so it's actually it's impacting supply and demand. Right. The demand's there because there's a statutory obligation to insure in Victoria, but the supply there of people who can offer those has dropped off a little bit. So therefore, that is impacting price in itself. So yes, there could be 1,000%, and I reserve judgment on a case by case because it's really hard to give exact answers. But I do know in dollar terms there are very substantial additions to insurance premiums because of cladding.
All right, we've got some more questions about insurance, Alan. So for insurance, does a building reclad with A2 carry an additional premium versus a 3mm cassette system? I have no idea what that means.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure what a 3mm cassette system is, but A2, yes. Because A2 it would be a polyethylene core that's still flammable, but a much lower percentage. So we do apply a loading for A2 composite panels.
All right, Alan, your thoughts on FM Global approved cladding. Now, I should say you do need to seek independent legal advice. This is Alan's just commentary here on a light-hearted, please do not sue us, public indemnity insurance kind of way. So, Alan, your thoughts on FM Global approved cladding?
Yeah, I haven't seen the FM Global approved cladding. So there's two things. We get cladding reports, or ask owners corporations get cladding reports and specialists, and the Insurance Council of Australia, which is like the peak body for insurance companies, they're also put some guidance as well. So we do look at data available, but that's FM Global is not one that I'm familiar with. So I'll just be neutral on that, not because I'm a neutral person, because I generally don't know, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. All right, so it seems that, insurance certainly, and rightly so, is of deep concern. We certainly are pleased to hear that there is movement happening from the state government in terms of providing that assistance to the 220 identified buildings anyway in that high risk criteria. But if you're stuck below that criteria, and certainly you have deepest thoughts and condolences, and I really don't know what else to offer you besides if I won lotto, I'd love to help. But the situation is that you're going to have to kind of like take some action. And you may not want to, and it may be scary too, but it has to happen because non-action is just as scary, if not scarier. So what you have to do is obviously register, like Craig has said. Craig, is there a website that they can register at? What do they need to Google, darling?
If they just Google Cladding Safety Victoria to start with, or the VBA, the Victorian Building Authority, they'll have full details, and they've both got extensive pages on the process and how to go about it.
And also,
so I've got, yep, sorry, I've got another question here. That's fine. I'm going to take that offline anyway. Alan, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all, Sam. Sorry for cutting through. And also, yeah, if you're in an owners corporation, do reach out to your strata manager. The likelihood is either they themselves have done it to another client, or they themselves or someone in their company. They can help guide through the process. we are seeing strata managers getting a high level of expertise in helping their customers through this, this being dealing with CSV in Victoria.
That's great. That's good. Now I've had a question here. Should we take any action if the working drawings and the endorsed documents state rendered FC sheeting and on site the builder has installed rendered foam?
Yes, is the answer. if the builder has substituted, and it used to happen quite a lot because EPS foam does have a better thermal rating. It's got a better acoustic rating than fibre cement sheet. But it's highly flammable. And back then, a lot of builders swapped it out just because they thought they were doing the right thing. And let's face it, the foam product was cheaper. But yes, certainly if it was specified as FC sheet and they've substituted to EPS foam, it's an issue.
All right. And if you've got proof, yep, there you hear it from Craig. You should think about taking action. All right. So Craig, darling, it's 45 minutes in. It's been lovely talking to you and Alan. I think that it has been helpful. People, if you have any more questions, please put them to us. Also, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you can still email me and send me the question, okay? Because I'll still actually ask Craig and also Alan to respond. All right, so we now have one more new message. All right. What is the general consensus view on combustible installation and sarking behind ACP PE cladding? If ACP PE cladding is to be removed, what about the installation sarking behind? What is the general consensus view on combustible installation and sarking behind? Oh, I think that's the same question. All right.
So basically, that needs to be tested because every building is different and every building has different type of sarking or insulation, and it is an issue because, you know, and until you do destructive testing, such as removing a panel and finding out exactly what's behind it, it could be anything. It could be compliant sarking and insulation, or certainly could be non-compliant as well.
Cool.
Testing. So you do need to do some further testing.
Yes. When in doubt, test. I think that applies to a lot of things in life, right? All right. So before we finish up for the evening, Alan, do you have any last words of encouragement, help, good wishes for our people who've actually tuned in tonight, which we've actually reached over 50. So thank you, everybody.
I think if I could do one takeaway, it's what I was saying earlier, is that fully understand the severity of what's dealing with, but get on the front foot, reach out, get a cladding report that you can present to your insurer, because then you will get the right price and the best price available in the marketplace. In absence of that, you will be paying more, and your insurance company disclose them, and they will stand behind you at the time of need. So that would be my thing. And also, it may not be enough, and people have emotive views, but a state government is putting $600 million to try and fix a problem that they themselves didn't cause directly. So I think there's some real credit there. And if these type of forums can expand that in Victoria and move that over into other jurisdictions, hopefully we can get some more state and federal support to help the owners' corporations through some of these problems. And if we can, it can be a real stimulation for sorting out some of the inherent issues that we know within in the building sector. That can be another positive that comes out of this. Absolutely. Great. Craig?
Yeah, look, I think we all know there's a lot of frustration out there because of the timing of this and how long it's taken. But I think, like I said, the good news is it is starting to gain traction, and it'll probably come in a bit of an avalanche over the next few months. I don't think COVID's helped anything in any industry, and unfortunately it does put everything on a little bit of go slow, but it is making headway, and I think the next few months we'll start seeing a lot of projects, get off the mark.
Well, quite frankly, the beauty about COVID is it gives you actually the chance to catch up on your paperwork. That's what I've always believed. And so I'm hoping that the Victorian government is doing exactly that. And listen, my Melbourneites here on the Zoom tonight, I am thinking of you and I feel for you, and I deeply hope that you're okay. And I actually did ring a whole bunch of people the other day, as Craig will attest, who live in Melbourne, to say, do you need me to tell you a joke? Do you need to hear me laugh, or do you need me to just like let you cry on my shoulder? So I offer you the same thing as well, because I understand that nobody likes to be bored, especially, you know, Melbourne people who love to be out and about and constantly enjoy life. But, you know, this will pass. It's a pause. Let this be a chance to look at the things that you do have in your life and be glad for that. And maybe we might be glad to see that there might be some traction from the Victorian government. I certainly we were writing to Minister Wynne and advising him of this recording and referring him to actually come to it and listen, because as you can see, there are people who are deeply concerned. And I am also worried for people in terms of their mental health. So listen, we are working towards trying to resolve this. And I do appreciate Craig and Alan joining me tonight, because this is a serious topic. And I think we actually did provide some education and some help. But if you haven't started doing something, please do something. Please. I cannot ask you enough. All right. Any last words, guys?
No, thank you. Thanks for hosting it, Sam, and we'll talk soon.
Great, Craig. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to, I endorse that, and also well done to the advocacy group for being that mentor on behalf of the consumers, which is not always an easy job, and it's not always an easy job to get the ear of the relevant stakeholders. So I wish you genuine good luck. And if anybody on the call has got any questions, then please send them through to you, Sam, and I'm happy to answer them to them the fullest that I can.
Absolutely. All right, great. Well, have a safe night, guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Really enjoyed your company, and stay safe, Melbourne. We love you.
Thanks, everybody. Stay well.
Okay. Bye.